Welcome to the Korea Pro Podcast, your weekly guide to understanding the most pressing and complicated developments shaping South Korea. We're your hosts, Jungmin Kim,
John Lei,
and Junha Park of Korea Pro.
Go beyond headlines as we explain not just what happened, but also what really matters and why it matters.
If you monitor South Korea for work or just trying to keep up, you're in the right place.
This is the Korea Pro Podcast.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the Korea Pro Podcast. It is now Thursday, April 23rd. It's a little bit after 4 p.m. And this week, or maybe even longer, it's been quite noisy between South Korea and the U.S.
Right, some were related to just U.S.-South Korea alliance and related to the Strait of Hormuz and assets related to it. But some are more linked to North Korea-related intelligence. It's quite murky, actually. Let's start with what started the controversy.
Right, so the first one with North Korea-related intelligence. So Pyongyang, the Minister of Unification of South Korea, he was addressing this Parliamentary Foreign Affairs Committee when he stated that Kusong, the region, or more particularly the Panghyun Air Base, was identified as North Korea's third uranium enrichment site.
Right, and he was basing it on like 10-year-old article, and which also had caveats based on like low resolution image at the time, right?
Right, so it was based on, well, the Unification Ministry later came back and doubled down on his statement, saying that it was based on the 2016 report by the US-based Institute for Science and International Security. Effectively, that report did only talk of its potential. It did not class it explicitly as a uranium enrichment facility in North Korea, since the only known ones are in Kangson and in Yongbyon. So those remarks sort of spiraled into this political talk
Right,
of the
because
day.
although he caveated it, but because of the high-profile nature being a minister, it spiraled because first media articles picked up on his remark, and then there was this very serious researcher who focused on Kusong in the past, writing the entire academic article, ending on a note, it needs like further analysis, but now that the unification minister is saying it, maybe he knows something that we don't. And so that's why it spiraled into, maybe it is real.
Right. So it's that whole idea of known unknowns,
Yeah.
where the South Korean administration and the U.S. administration still have not publicly acknowledged Kusong as a potential or an explicit uranium enrichment site.
Right, and there are like analysts who disagree with that potential as well, right?
So what the Unification Ministry, one of the reports the Unification Ministry was citing was CSIS report from last year.
Well, that was another drama, right?
So Dr. Cha basically came out on Twitter saying that we did not report on enrichment activities, which is the claim by the minister. We reported on high explosive test triggers.
And I
That's a big
remember
difference.
he did say directly, big difference. And so I don't think Chung Dong-young responded to that or anything.
No, he didn't respond to that, but he did respond to the political controversy that spiraled.
Like a long Facebook post, right?
Right. So there was reports coming out, unverified reports, of course, from Yonhap News saying that they were citing a senior military source, saying that the U.S. cut off certain intelligence.
Why did the U.S. cut off that intelligence?
Because An Gyu-baek,
The defense minister.
because the defense minister, or was it saying unification minister? Anyways, because South Koreans are perceived from the U.S. point of view as having breached how they shouldn't leak classified information. But then that also feeds into the spiraling of this
Right.
topic. And then reporters started conjecturing, maybe there is some truth to
Right.
it.
So there's a lot of he said, they said going on at the moment. So there's a lot of speculation that led to, is this Chung Dong-young remark connected to the U.S. intelligence cutdown?
Right. Did
But-
anybody apologize or not apologize or protest or anything?
Right. So there were reports again stemming from a PPP lawmaker, the head of the Defense Committee, Sung Il-jong, who said that the USFK commander went up to An Gyu-baek and protested based on what Chung said during the parliamentary hearing. The defense
That
ministry
he breached the trust.
The defense ministry came out in its regular briefing saying that this was completely untrue. There was nothing of the sort. An Gyu-baek also doubled down on it, saying that there was also nothing of the sort, that the U.S. was basically trying to ask for an explanation. USFK, on the other hand, has been very hushed.
That's interesting. What was the second line, General Brunson related headlines?
Right, so General Brunson, with also Admiral Papero, was showing up at the Senate and the House on two separate committees for their armed services committees. I think that the first remark that he made, which caught headlines, was at the Senate, where he was talking about he was referring to the removal of THAAD munitions from South Korea to the Middle East.
So this is different from THAAD batteries that media articles usually say,
Right.
talk about.
So Korea Pro also reported on this earlier last month, but it was basically alluding to the fact that THAAD batteries, so the skeleton,
The launchers.
the launchers and the radar system will remain on the peninsula.
So the tail is still here.
Yes.
But the stuff that goes out
The missiles.
went.
The missiles
I see.
are currently it's been referred to on hold on site for transferring to the Middle
So they're
East.
still in Korea, but they're set to move the munitions to wherever they're needed.
I see. So he was saying it's not true that we move THAAD to Hormuz, but we might move some parts, is what he was saying?
Yes.
I see.
Mm.
Did that help with soothing the sense of fear among South Korean public recently?
Well, not really, because munitions they take a long time to replenish. Lockheed Martin also has a backlog that it needs to deliver to the U.S. military as well. So when you're considering the amount of munitions that are being spent in the conflict right now and with Iran, despite there being a ceasefire, if there's ever a continued attack, then the replenishment of the Korean Peninsula-based munitions, especially the THAAD munitions, will be a source of concern for security analysts here.
I see.
This nuclear umbrella seems a lot like made out of paper.
Well, it's still an umbrella and it's still there, so we have to trust it, And then there were other issues that were mentioned and also were controversial, also because of PPP's Hang Il-jung before, because he mentioned the issue OPCON. Was it brought up during the hearing?
Yeah, so it was mentioned in both hearings. It was mentioned more explicitly in the second hearing just yesterday at the House, where Brunson was saying, he was the first person to set a deadline for OPCON. So he's saying that OPCON will be delivered to the South Korean military or aim to be delivered to the South Korean military.
Sounds like a deal.
Yeah. Effectively is. And they are aiming to meet the conditions for transferring OPCON by 2020. Specifically...
29.
Yeah, that's reportedly, but it does look like Brunson is looking at a much more clearer timeline because he did mention that he sent it to the OSW, the Office of the Secretary of War.
It does seem like this might be the first time or the clearest yet that a high-level U.S. military official would mention the timeline for the OPCON, right?
Yeah, Brunson has always been talking about it's about military readiness, not a specific political date.
Yeah, and also the agreement was not time-based, but conditions-based. And then South Koreans were like, yeah, it's conditions-based, but by 2028.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Brunson was also alluding to that fact yesterday. Actually, no, at the Senate 2 days ago, where he talked to Senator Shaheen and responded to her question saying that the allies must ensure that political expediency does not outpace the conditions required for the transfer.
And yet he still came up with a date, which was 2029.
Let's move on to non-military, but more business-related affairs, but diplomacy. Lee Jae Myung has been busy this week.
Yeah, he was in India and he's currently in Vietnam as we speak. Now, the agreements that were signed between South Korea and India were unusual in the sense that they had a lot of depth and breadth. Now, we have
You're saying it's usually shallow?
Yeah, very much so. If we go back to all of these previous summits that we've had between South Korean and Indian leaders, from Nomuon all the way up to the present day, they talked about expanding ties from a strategic partnership to a special strategic partnership, because apparently those are two very different things.
They are diplomatically, John. Come on.
Sure, whatever you say. And then when Moon Jae-in visited Modi back when he was president, he was talking about people-to-people exchanges and peace, like as though there's been a war between India and South Korea. I don't know. It's always been very ceremonial. But this time, with Lee Jae Myung visiting Modi, they didn't talk about expanding ties as they typically did before, because in the past it was all very hoity-toity. Ooh, wouldn't things be great if we could imagine a better world? Think of, a John Lennon sort of a approach. But this time, with Lee Jae Myung going to India, both leaders are saying, we're both really not looking at a good set of options with the way things are going on in the world. And so both countries, if you look at the biggest sorts of agreements, the two things that stand out the most, were energy and shipbuilding. India exports a lot of chemical feedstocks, and South Korea exports a lot of refined petroleums to India. It's a very give and take relationship. But because South Korea has a lot of trouble getting access to chemical feedstocks as well as crude oil and naphtha, the agreements that both countries had specifically mentioned these chemicals.
I think this shows change of time, I think, because if we look back just 5 years ago, I mean, even 2 years ago, if you ask any South Korean MOFA officials or anyone in the cabinet about the global South or India, Latin America,
They'll say, we know they exist.
we know they exist. And by the way, Latin America and the Middle East are in the same department, right? And so I think South Koreans, first, there was no real pressure to really, really know them immediately and urgently so far until recently. Maybe there were, but it wasn't like crisis mode, right? So they always sort of operated under this inertia of treating like certain continent as a bulk, and there was like a lack of understanding of what kind of actual cooperation that can be done.
Well, just like the way wars teach Americans geography, this energy crisis is teaching South Koreans about the existence of countries like Turkmenistan, for example.
Right, and how Arctics don't have penguins, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so this energy agreement these both countries had, and they also included shipbuilding into the whole mix. India has great ambitions for their shipbuilding industry. They want to build like 400 plus ships, and they want to import parts of the South Korean shipbuilding ecosystem to India to help them build all of these ships. And South Korea is very happy about this because the agreements between these two countries when it comes to shipbuilding is about eventually using these ships to transport energy, which is exactly what South Korea wants.
And that's a synergy. And so it sounds like it was pretty pragmatic, practical sort of summit, it seems, rather than ceremonial, like you mentioned earlier.
Both countries have their feet in the fire.
Nothing to celebrate, basically.
It's a marriage of convenience, and it's a very badly needed convenience marriage.
And so it looks like it might be a new trend in summitry going forward. Frankly, there's much better stuff to write about from reporters' point of view if all the summits are like this. Let's move on to the next visit, where he's still at right now.
With Vietnam, Vietnam has always been an important partner for South Korea. In fact, a lot of Indians have been complaining about how India is such a large market, but South Korea invests so much more in Vietnam than they have ever invested in India. But anyway, Vietnam remains a very important partner. And over the years, with South Korean leaders and Vietnamese leaders meeting, they've been talking about semiconductor exchanges and all that. Yoon was very famous for going to Vietnam to talk about how because Samsung could help build semiconductor factories in Vietnam as well. This time around, yes, I'm sure they're still going to be talking about semiconductors. But the biggest thing that they talked about so far was about nuclear power agreements. Now, South Korea has had a bit of a very strained relationship when it comes to nuclear power exports, especially when it comes to Westinghouse Electric, because of this claim that South Korean nuclear reactors use proprietary American technology reactors. But according to this still hush-hush agreement between Westinghouse and these South Korean companies, South Korean companies can export their nuclear reactors to certain countries. And one of those countries is Vietnam. And Vietnam is thrilled with the idea of having their own nuclear power because, again, just like everyone else, the Vietnamese are struggling to secure crude oil and natural gas.
And it seems like compared to past summits with these countries, there are not so much political security peninsula related remarks all that much, right?
They do have that boilerplate remark. Vietnam supports South Korea's inter-peace efforts and all
What's
that.
inter-peace? Inter-Korea peace process, John?
I don't care because it doesn't really exist. It exists in phraseology or somewhere.
No, cold peace exists. That's Dr. Victor Cha. Anyways.
I don't care. But what South Korea really needs at the moment right now is trade and energy. South Korea needs to diversify as quickly as possible away from China and the United States. And the way to do this is to go after all of these markets that South Korea has been neglecting for far too long. And we are now seeing the beginning of the start of this diversification process.
That's very poetic. That's very beautiful.
Thanks.
Let's move on to econ. There were some numbers that South Korea would probably like to celebrate.
Yeah, South Korea's first quarter GDP went up by, 1.7%, which is the highest that it has gone up in 5.5 years.
Was this year on year or quarter by quarter?
It was the first quarter for this year.
I see.
And
And it compared to the BOK projection earlier, it's like twice as much, it seemed.
it was higher, and it's really because of all the semiconductor exports that South Korea's been making. If you look at the quarterly earnings, the quarterly profits that companies have been making, like SK Hynix and Samsung and LG and everyone else, they have been just rolling and raking in the money.
And by the way, Hynix had the earnings report and it's like record high as
And
well.
it beat expectations as well.
And I think the reason for that might be this is first quarter, which means it's before the impact of the Iran war, which
It's
is April.
and it's also a backward-looking figure.
Yeah.
If we actually look at other data that just came out today as well, if you look at the Bank of Korea data that talks about the producer price index or the consumer sentiment index, things are looking downward. More people expecting inflation to go up, more people expecting the economy to slow down. And the number one reason a lot of these people point to their sentiments not looking very good these days is because of increasing fuel costs. Sure, the South Korean government has been subsidizing energy despite their rhetoric about wanting to decrease demand. But eventually, people understand that this subsidization program that the South Korean government is using, it's not going to be permanent. Eventually, these subsidies will be either cut down or withdrawn, and their pocketbooks are going to end up being lighter. And so, if you look back at the first quarter, yay, things look great. But if you look at the next quarter or the next 2 quarters, especially when we look at the fact that we are not just seeing increasing prices, but also decreasing actual supply. Like the Japanese are freaking out right now because they are worried that they cannot get enough photoresist because of this war in Iran. Photoresist is an important input that goes into chip manufacturing. If they can't get photoresist and cannot export that to South Korea, it doesn't matter what the first quarter looks like.
This is like deja vu from last week when we were talking about bromine, right?
Yeah, except now we're talking about everything.
Right.
This is an everything crisis.
Oh my God, my ear. Devil's advocate, the real gross domestic income was up 7.5%. And then it was the lead of the release of the data that it was highest in 38 years. Does this matter? No.
Reduced demand.
Mhm.
You might have a bit more money to be able to spend, but with reduced demand, and not because there's an organic reduced demand, but because of a reduced level of supply, it doesn't matter if you have got more money to spend.
But regardless of John's perpetually bad mood today or this week,
Or the past 40 years.
Right. The SK Hynix stockholders are just very, very happy today.
Oh, I'm sure the stockholders are very happy right now. As of right now, the chip sector is the one sector that's keeping this entire economy afloat. Look at a collapsing building and look at a tiny little stick that's holding that building up, and that's the sector.
No, dude, that stick is pretty strong, though.
It's still one stick.
And next Friday, May 1st, would be Labor Day, 노동절. This, in English, it's the same, but it used to be 근로자의 날. But 노동절 is a bit more progressive sort of term, and we used to have this term in the past. It changed, and it changed back recently. And now, starting with passing the cabinet earlier this month, it's a statutory public holiday in South Korea. And so, and there's 어린이날 as well, the Children's Day in the following week. So I feel like if you want to catch people before their long weekends, you should probably catch them before May 1st. And April 28th, Tuesday, we have Seoul Circuit. I will be moderating and speaking because it's not going to be like a keynote-led or briefing-led discussion, but we will basically do like a collective therapy session on what the Yellow Envelope Act means in real life. What can the companies do to prepare for them? There will be lawyers in the room as well as corporations and NGOs and others who are looking closely into the act as well.
And all of this information will be sent to your email inbox by Monday, 2 p.m. by the Weekend Newsletter. So if you'd like to know more, please subscribe. Bye-bye.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in.
If you want to know more, sign up for our daily executive briefings. We'll brief you on all you need to know from the past 24 hours and why it matters, delivered to your inbox every morning.
If you want to stay ahead of the curve, sign up for Korea Pro to get a full package of insights, from daily expert analysis to profiles, month in review, week ahead, and more.
And until next time, I'm Jungmin Kim.
I'm Junho Park.
And I'm John Lee, and we'll see you next time on the Korea Pro Podcast.